My parents called me into the living room. On a Sunday afternoon in March, my mother was sitting in her usual chair. My father was standing by the window, with his hands in his pockets, which is what he does when he's already decided something, and doesn't want to discuss it. They told me they had updated their will. They told me that the house I grew up in, the house I had helped maintain for 6 years, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands, would be going to my cousin Marcus, along with the majority of the estate. I asked why. My father looked at the window. My mother looked at her hands. After a long silence, she said, "Marcus needs it more than you do. You've always been the strong one. You'll be fine." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Okay." I drove home. I made a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table for about 2 hours. And then I started making a list. Single piano note. Music begins low and slow. That list became the blueprint for the next 3 years of my life. And what I built from it, I'll be honest with you, shocked even me. Before I tell you what was on that list, I need to give you the full picture, because this story is only shocking if you understand what came before that Sunday afternoon. I am not someone who had a bad relationship with my parents. That's what makes this hard to explain to people. My parents are not villains. They're just people who made a decision that revealed something about how they saw me that I had never fully understood before. And once you see something like that clearly, you can't unsee it. What I did next wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't about making them regret it, though I'll admit that was a side effect. It was about finally, at 34 years old, deciding to build a life that was entirely mine. No inheritance, no safety net, no approval required. And what I discovered in that process is that being cut out of something can be the most clarifying thing that ever happens to you. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up as the responsible one. I don't say that with pride. I say it as a fact. The way you'd describe the weather in a particular city. It was just the climate I grew up in. My younger sister was creative and unpredictable. My parents spent most of their energy managing her. With love, but with energy. I was the one who didn't need managing. Straight A's. Part-time job at 16. Full scholarship to state university. Never asked them for money after I turned 22. Marcus, my cousin, was the son of my mother's brother. His parents had divorced when he was 12, and he'd had a genuinely difficult adolescence. I understood that. I had sympathy for that. What I had less sympathy for was the version of Marcus that showed up at every family gathering for the past decade. Charming, funny, always in some kind of financial trouble, always leaving with something he hadn't arrived with. Alone here, a borrowed car there, my parents covering his rent twice that I knew of. I never said anything. It wasn't my business. But I did notice. What I also noticed, and this matters to the story, is that over the same decade, I had quietly done quite a lot for my parents. When my father had his knee surgery in 2019, I took 2 weeks off work to drive him to appointments and handle the house. When the roof started leaking in 2021, I organized the contractors, managed the project, and covered $4,000 of the cost because they were on a fixed income and the timing was bad. When my mother started struggling with the paperwork that comes with aging, insurance forms, tax documents, Medicare coordination, I became the person she called. Every time. I did all of it willingly. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do it expecting an inheritance. I did it because they were my parents. And that's what you do. But I also, if I'm being completely honest, assumed that my consistency meant something. That Sunday in March taught me that I had been wrong about that. 2 days after the conversation, I called my parents' attorney, not to contest anything, just to understand the full scope of the changes. The new will left Marcus 70% of the estate. The house, most of the liquid assets. The property my grandfather had purchased in 1971. My sister and I were each left 15%. When I asked if there was a reason documented, the attorney, who I could tell was uncomfortable, said only that my parents had indicated they believed Marcus had greater financial need. Greater financial need. I want to tell you something about Marcus at this point. Marcus was 31 years old. He had been given money by my parents on at least 6 separate occasions that I knew of. He had not held a job for more than 18 months. In the past 5 years, he was charming, likable, and completely comfortable, accepting support from other people indefinitely. He did not know about my father's surgery. He had not visited during my mother's difficult winter 2 years prior. He had sent a card when my grandfather died. A card. I don't say any of this to villainize Marcus. He is who he is. I say it because it matters to understand what my parents' decision actually communicated. It communicated that presence, reliability, and quiet contribution were taken for granted, that they were the baseline, the expected behavior, not something that warranted acknowledgement, and that a person who struggled visibly, who needed help openly, who showed up less but asked for more, was somehow more deserving of their legacy. I sat with that understanding for a long time, and then I made peace with it, because I realized something important. The inheritance was never mine to count on. The life I had built without it was, and the life I was going to build from here forward, was going to make the inheritance irrelevant. I went back to my list. The list had 7 items on it. I'm going to share all 7 with you, because I think they matter, not just as the blueprint for what I did, but as a framework for what anyone does when they decide to stop waiting for something external to validate their worth. Item 1. Stop. Stop being the person who handles everything for everyone, without acknowledgement, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. My time and energy had real value. I was going to start spending them accordingly. Item 2. Audit. I listed every skill, every asset, every professional connection I had, independent of my family, independent of any inheritance. The audit took about 3 hours. By the end of it, I had 2.5 pages of things I had never fully valued because I had always treated them as secondary to the plan. What plan? The vague plan that assumed the family foundation would always be there. That plan. Item 3. Income. I had a stable job in property management. Good salary. Not life-changing. I decided to build a second income stream, using skills I already had: financial organization, contractor management, property documentation, everything I had been doing for my parents for free for 6 years. I started offering those services professionally. Took on 2 clients in the first month at modest rates. Item 4. Property. I had savings I had never deployed aggressively, because I had always vaguely assumed the family property would eventually factor into my future. With that assumption gone, I suddenly had full clarity on what to do with those savings. I started researching investment properties. Item 5. Distance. Not estrangement. I wasn't going to punish my parents by disappearing from their lives, but I was going to stop being the person who managed their problems, who absorbed their administrative chaos, who showed up without being asked, because that's just who I was. If they needed help, they could ask. I would decide how to respond. That was new for me. It was uncomfortable for about 2 weeks. Then it felt like taking off a backpack I had been wearing for so long. I had forgotten it was there. Item 6. Build publicly. I was going to stop being quietly competent in ways that only my family could see. I was going to build things that existed in the world with my name on them. Property management consultancy, a digital presence, a professional reputation that existed completely independent of anyone's perception of me. Item 7. Time. I gave myself 3 years, not to get revenge, not to make anyone sorry, to be, by every measurable standard, completely and visibly fine. Year 1 was about foundation. I formalized my property management consultancy, LLC, website, professional profiles. I took on 6 clients by month 8. Combined revenue in year 1 from the consultancy, just under $40,000 on top of my salary. I also purchased my first investment property, a 2-bedroom unit that needed cosmetic work. I managed the renovation myself, which cost me time but almost nothing in contractor fees. Given my existing network, I put it on the rental market in month 10. It rented in 4 days. I did not tell my parents about any of this, not out of secrecy. It just never came up because I had stopped being the person who reported their life to the family. Year 2 was about acceleration. The consultancy grew through referrals. I hired a part-time assistant. I purchased a second property, this one larger in a better location, using the equity I had built from the first. By the end of year 2, my personal net worth had grown by more than 3 times the value of the inheritance I had been cut from. I want to be careful how I say that. I'm not saying it to be cold. I'm saying it because it is the most important number in this story. The thing they decided I didn't deserve, I had already built past it, twice over, by myself. Year 3 is where the story turns, in a direction I genuinely hadn't anticipated. In the spring of year 3, Marcus ran into financial trouble, serious trouble, the kind that required liquidating assets, including, my mother told me during one of our now monthly calls, potentially the house. She said it quietly, like she was telling me about the weather. I listened. I didn't say anything reactive. I asked a few practical questions. I told her I'd look into some options. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then I made some calls. Here is what I want to be precise about. What I did next was not revenge. I have thought carefully about whether to call it that, and I keep arriving at the same answer. No. What I did was make a business decision that happened to involve my family, in a way that clarified something permanently. I reached out to Marcus directly. I told him I had heard about his situation. I told him I might be interested in acquiring the property, the house, my grandfather's house, a fair market value. He said yes almost immediately. I had the property appraised. I made a clean, documented offer through my attorney. It was fair. It was professional. It had nothing in it that anyone could object to. Marcus accepted. He needed the liquidity. I purchased my grandfather's house, the house that had been left to Marcus. Because he needed it more, I purchased it, with money I had earned. In the 3 years since that Sunday afternoon in March, when my mother found out that I was the buyer, that the house was going back into our family, because I had been in a position to buy it, she called me and cried. Not sad crying, the other kind. She said, "I didn't know you had done all of this." I said gently, "I know, Mom. You didn't ask." My father got on the phone. He said very little. But before he hung up he said, "I'm proud of you, son." I should have said that more. I told him I appreciated it. And I meant it. Marcus, for the record, used the sale proceeds to pay off his debts and moved to a different city for a fresh start. I genuinely hope it works out for him. This was never about Marcus. It was never really about the house. It was about the moment I stopped organizing my life around what my family decided I deserved, and started building what I knew I was capable of. I still have a relationship with my parents. It's different now, more honest, I think. More balanced. They know finally who I actually am. Not the reliable background figure, who could be counted on to handle things quietly. The person who built something, who showed up for himself, the same way he'd always shown up for everyone else. The house needs some work. I'm managing the renovation myself. My grandfather built it in 1971. His name is still on a beam in the basement, penciled there during construction, which I found when I was pulling up the old flooring. I left it there. I think about that Sunday in March sometimes. My father at the window, my mother looking at her hands. And I think, if they hadn't said what they said that day, if they had left things the way they were, I might still be waiting, still being the strong one in the background, still assuming that reliability was its own reward. Being cut out was the most expensive gift. anyone has ever given me, cost me an inheritance, and gave me everything else. If you're someone sitting somewhere tonight who has been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly counted out by the people who were supposed to see you, I just want you to know, the list is where you start. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are in your story, because there are more of you than you know. And if you want to see what else is inside this channel, subscribe. New story every week. Quiet Revenge.